Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Morning. Ouch, kiddo. I haven't yet moved into where I'm gonna be. And things have been crazy. I only just uploaded the. What am I talking about? I only just uploaded the activity like 1 second ago. Okay, so go to Canvas and download that so that you can fill it out during today's presentation, which is about Tadeusz Borowski's This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen, specifically a couple of short stories, 4 short stories from that short story collection. And Matthew is going to present, so I'm going to make Matthew a co-host. All right. And I'm going to mute myself while Matthew presents. Are you ready?
Yeah, do I just hit share screen and then it'll come up?
Should be, yeah.
Okay. How's that? Okay, so This Way for the Gas is written by Tadeusz. In the story, refers to him as Tadeusz Borowski. He is born in 1922 in Sofia, Ukraine. His parents are Polish. His father was actually exiled in 1926 for being part of the Polish military in World War I. But he was returned in 1932 part of a prisoner exchange in Warsaw. They did not have like a well-off life. His life was hard as a kid, and he went hungry many times. He was first educated in a Franciscan boarding school, but when the Germans came and went to Poland, they kicked all the Polish kids out. So then he ended up going to what they called an underground university, which is where different like Polish teachers would take kids into their apartment and teach them that way. He actually started publishing poems that he wrote in 1942, but that really wasn't allowed because of German censorship. For Polish newspapers and radio stations, it can only have been German produced things. And if you found materials that were against the censorship, you could be killed or sent to the concentration camp. But he published in an underground network leaflets and poems that he printed himself. But the Nazis found out and they set a trap for him and his wife in their apartment. And then he was first sent to a Warsaw prison before being sent to Auschwitz and they were separated from his fiance, but they were both sent to Auschwitz. They arrived 3 weeks before the decision was made that only Jews would go to the gas chamber. He remained in Auschwitz for a year from 1944 to 1945. Before we moving to a different camp and where the U.S. actually liberated them. He was displaced after from his fiance for a year while she was in Sweden, and he went back to Poland, but then in 1946 he got married. He became a communist in 1948 and actually worked in Germany for a year in 1949. But after 15 months, he came back and he ended up actually committing suicide. He actually, with poison gas, 3 days before his child was born, and he was only 28 when that happened. And he's still remembered as one of the greatest Polish authors for stories and poems from Auschwitz and its experiences during concentration camps. So This Way for the Gas is actually known as Farewell to Maria originally, but then it was changed. It's pretty much about a time in Auschwitz. He wrote it right after he was freed. His stories are all in first person, and those are experiences that he had. They are known for being to show the brutal and deplorable conditions that were contained inside the camp. And it talks about daily life, and he brings up the question if he and the other prisoners are more privileged prisoners were victims or executioners. Some themes that can be seen, at least I saw in it, was hate/racism, savagery, and survival of the fittest. So the setting of his stories are Auschwitz. That opened in 1940, located in Poland. It was the biggest death and concentration camp the Nazis had. First, it was a political prisoners camp, but eventually it was turned to a concentration and death camp, where Nazis sent anyone unfit, which include communists, Jews, teachers, gays, and disabled, or people that went against their laws. The ones who could not work, children and women, were sent directly to the showers, which were the gas chambers, which they would be killed with poison gas. Prisoners that could not work were also sent there. The very bad conditions in that camp, because a lot of disease, starvation, and being overworked caused many to die. There was also inhumane medical experiments as well by Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele. And Auschwitz is open and is still, and it's a memorial and museum to the people who died. I actually have a video to show a little bit more about it.
So we can't see the video. Is it playing?
You can't see the video?
No.
I can see the video. Wait, let me see if I can.
And we're not hearing it either. Okay. Maybe we could
see it now?
over. We can see it now, but
all right.
Could you maybe you might have to change the settings and make sure that the video is playing on your speakers.
It says it's working, supposedly.
All right, I'll let you know. I don't hear anything.
There's no words anyways. It's just,
okay, good.
It's just music in the background.
Sounds good.
That's just so that video pretty much shows what the conditions really look like. So that's just like a firsthand like look at what happened and what it looked like in that camp. So now to the short stories. So the summary of the first short story, which is the longer one, this way for the gas, ladies and gentlemen. This is just the first one, but it's the title for all the short stories. It's under one title, and they each have different little titles for each chapter. It opens talking about how everyone was naked in the bad conditions of the camp. But Sadiq, which he references himself as that, and his friend Henry have Better Than Others, as they're part of Canada, which is a special group that deals with the well-being and wealth of the camp. And they assist taking the Jews off the transport of the trains and taking them to the gas chamber. They actually get to take the Jewish people's food that they bring with them. But the reason that they're in that special group is because they're non-Jews in that camp, in that group. So Canada is taken to the ramp where the train stops and lets the Jewish people out. They stand by the rail car and they just pull things out and pull people out. The rail car is like loaded to the max, like no one can really breathe. So there's people coming out like the windows trying just to breathe as they plead for like water. Then they split up the women, the men, the children, the healthy and unhealthy. Then an important part that it said was after they take them from the train, they put them into trucks. One of the things that Sadiq mentions is that 60 people are per truck, and 16 were filled just that day. So it just shows like the amount of people they're doing at once. After Sadiq and the other, Sadiq goes in and cleans the cars. He finds many dead, trampled, suffocated babies. He mentions them like taking them out like chickens because there's so many of them. And this is the same process that keeps happening throughout the day. And some themes that are seen. Hate and racism is one thing that is seen because Henry speaks about the Greeks as being greedy and like insects, and just comparing them to insects is degrading. And it just shows like that even though they're Jewish, they're not Jewish, but these people are there, they sometimes have the same like attitudes towards other people as the Nazis do. Another example can be found on page 40. So if everyone can bring it up, I can put it up here. On page 40, does anyone want to read this part, or should I just read it?
I'll make someone read it. That's 40.
Yeah, it's from right here. It's just right here down.
Starting with Listen, Henry.
Yep. Okay, go ahead.
Is Hope gonna do it? Or
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's right here from Listen.
Okay. Listen, Henry, are we good people? That's stupid. Why do you ask? You see, my friend, you see, I don't know why, but I'm furious, simply furious with these people, furious because I must be here because of them. I feel no pity. I am not sorry they're going to the gas chamber, damn them all. I could throw myself at them, beat them with my fists. It must be pathological, I just can't understand. Do you want me to keep going?
No, and the rest of it, he just talks about how Henry says it's okay to hate. Let me go back to here. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Mm-mm.
No? Okay. I have to go this way then. Now, can you see it?
Yeah.
All right. So this is pretty much, he's just talking about why it's like okay to hate, which is something that you really don't think that would happen from these prisoners, as they're there because the Nazis hate them and what they're doing. So this is just like a different, like, it's kind of like it's kind of like ironic almost, because they're also hating as much. So some questions, because they're weaker. Some questions are, do you think they're good men?
From what we've read, we don't know much about them, but just knowing like he cares enough to ask if he's a good man, I think that shows that he must be.
Anyone else? Guess not. So, to the next question, does the reasoning for why Tahdig hates the Jewish people and why Henry views them as weak any different than the ones of the German soldiers?
I mean, the one difference is that, like, obviously they don't believe in Hitler as much as, or at all. But other than that, there are a lot of reasons that it seems like the same. I mean, when you have power over someone, that can take over you. Like, if you're stronger than someone, if you see that they're weaker, you feel like you're more dominant. And because of the position he was in, he, just like the soldiers, he felt angry at them that they were so weak, and I'm sure that's how the soldiers felt too.
I think that has something to do with it. I think also because I don't know if based on the conditions, even though the German soldiers did have it a little bit better, they were still in the heat, in the cold. They were still had to be there, which maybe not all of them actually wanted to be there because since Hitler took over, he like forced a lot of people to join the army. Mm-hmm. So some of them might not want to have been there anyways. But especially for Tahdig and the other non-Jewish prisoners, I think I don't know, I kind of feel like I understand why they hate them, because if it wasn't for the Jewish people being there, they wouldn't have to see all this death and go to the trains and everything. So another theme was survival of the fittest. Henry talks about the worst transports are from France, where he knows people, but when he can't tell them, because one of the rules is that you can't tell the prisoners getting off what's going to happen to them, because for some reason they didn't want them to know, because they were afraid that they would panic and start like a ruckus. So they just lied and said, "Oh, you're just going to take a shower." That was the same thing for Tahdig when he saw the Polish people, but they knew if they told them that they could actually be sent to the gas chamber themselves, so they would just lie. And the men of Canada would work very hard in knowing that they were going to kill people, even when they put them on the trucks. They assisted in the mass killings of the Jews just because that was how they would survive pretty much until they eventually got moved and the U.S. saved them. And they also felt that these were good and profitable, actually, these transports of people, because they would bring food in their bags and vodka and drinks, which they did not have because they were starving themselves. The Germans wouldn't let them take anything except like food and drinks, but they still allowed them to have it, so that's why they saw it as profitable. An example can be found on, I wanted to show one on 43, so let's see if I can get that. 43, it was right here. It talks about how like their throats are like so dry, and they see that they like want the people to go away, but they still need what they're bringing, because if not, they're going to die themselves of starvation. So it's very important for like them to like have them come. So even though they know it's terrible that they're dying, they still just need the resources they're bringing. So the question I have is, do you blame the men of Canada for viewing the transports as being good and rich?
It's because of like what they had before they came in, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much they view it. Do they view it good, even though they're killing people, but they're bringing food and water for them to survive? Do you blame them for viewing that because they're bringing stuff good, even though they're killing many people in the same process?
I think that they're like, if you're, no matter what, if you're killing people, like I don't think there's any way that you can be good, so I don't blame them.
It's like I think the narrator does, right? The narrator blames himself. Seems like a lot of guilt in this story. So the narrator seems to kind of see him and the others as complicit as yeah. So even if we as readers might cut them a bit of slack, I think that we're supposed to kind of see that they are part of this horrible process of murdering, several thousand people in a day, right? Makes sense.
Is there anyone else that wants to comment? All right, I'll get to the next theme in that story. So savagery is something that's very much seen in this short story because it's filled with savagery and different actions done by the soldiers for the conditions that they put the prisoners through. They're starving, they're dying of disease. You see the inhuman labor. They're all walking around naked because they don't have any clothes. There's dead people all around everywhere. They even talk about the dead babies. And then you can see in the rail cars that they're barely able to breathe, and they're like pretty much choking of not getting any air, and they're not getting any water. And then there's a part where one-legged girl is getting loaded. That's kind of near the end of that short story by Canada, and they were going to just put them in hurry with the rest of them to the gas chamber, but the German soldier actually said put it in the truck with the dead bodies that they found, unconscious people they found in the train. And she ends up being burnt alive, which is something that's definitely very savage to do. And then at the last transport, the third one that they talk about, a girl falls out of the car because she's just gasping for air, and she falls right out the window. And instead of like just putting her with the rest of the people after they load the people out, a German soldier kicks her down and shoots her in the back of the head as like a public execution, just to show how much power they have to all of them, to not just the Jewish people, but also the men of Canada, to show that they are the ones in charge. And then the Canada people are also whipped for not going fast enough. And lastly, he mentions the German soldiers would rip gold out of teeth of the dead Jewish people and take diamonds from the dead Jewish prisoners' uterus and colon, because sometimes they'd hide them there, and German soldiers knew that, and they would just go right in and rip those out. On page, I just want to show one thing over here. Just to show the extent of like how I talked about the transports. On right here, it says the transports swell into weeks, months, years. When the war is over, they will count up the marks on their notebooks, all 4.5 million of them. The bloodiest battle of the war, the greatest victory of the strong united Germany. So the checks on the notebook were representing each truck that left. And that just shows like how many people they really killed in those gas chambers. Just astronomical how many they killed. So it just shows how much savagery they had, that they would just almost like building cars, just like an assembly line of just bringing people in, killing them, and getting rid of them. And here. So now to the next one. To the supper. So in this short story, it shows Sadiqi's freezing, starving under the night because there's no new transport. So this shows really like what happens when they don't get any new people, even though they're killing them. But now he hasn't eaten for 17 hours. The whole camp has to come and watch 20 Russian soldiers that are accused of stealing. The only real reason that is given for why they're accused is because they're Russian and they're communist. So that just shows the hate that the Nazis have for other people. And then after they have 20 soldiers, each one of them have a gun to their head, and they shoot them in front of the whole camp. And then after, one of the camp elders, one of the people that are in charge, says the whole camp will go out food. So the themes that can be seen are, it shows that the Russians are criminals and pronounced as criminals just because they're communism, and there's no other justification to prove why if they stole anything. Then the savagery. So the soldiers, if they stole anything, it was probably just food because they were starving, but the Germans would just kill them anyways. And so, and a public execution to show their power. A question I have about this is, now that we see what happens to the men of Canada with no transports arrive, do you blame the men of Canada for viewing the transports in the other short story as being good and rich?
I mean, in that situation, kind of trying to look out for themselves, you know, like get themselves something to eat, something to drink, you know, get themselves some possessions so that they can keep living.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of a big game of survival at that point.
And like, I don't know if you caught it, but like to kind of go with the theme of savagery. So you said 155 paragraphs 2 and 3, but also like the very end of the story. So like they've been starving. Do you catch what happens? On the last
end of this one?
156. Yeah.
Yeah.
They've been starving. They watched the Russian soldiers get executed, and then
they start talking about like eating like people almost.
Yeah, eating people's brains because they have had no food, and the brains have been spattered. And a Muslimized Jew from Estonia tried to convince me all day that human brains are in fact so tender you can eat them absolutely raw. And so, so like there you go, savagery, cannibalism, right?
Yeah.
We thought the first story was bad, but in this story it gets worse.
Yeah, it just keeps getting worse and worse because you may see like the Jewish people, yes, they're getting killed, but if you see like the actual conditions inside the camp for the people that stay and work, it's just even worse.
Yeah.
So that could be seen in the true story. So you see, in this story, Tzaddik is sick. He has pneumonia, or pneumonia.
Pneumonia. The P is silent.
Oh, okay. He's laying in the hospital on a straw, dirty bed with like dirty blankets, like so nothing's really washed. There's nothing sanitized in there. He has bed sores all over him. He hasn't had any food or water, and he feels like he's gonna die because he's starving. He has bed sores. He's sick. No one's really helping him. There's other Jewish, not just Jewish, but like other people around him that are also sick and dying in the hospital. They're pretty much just put in the hospital not to be treated, but to keep them away from the other prisoners so not everyone gets sick. There's another Jewish violinist from Holland dying of pneumonia, and he tells Tzaddik to tell him some stories about his life. Tzaddik tells some stories about his life, but one of the most important ones was when he was in jail, right after he's publishing his work in Warsaw before he was actually sent to Auschwitz. And the story talks about how he was a boy with the Bible. Later in the day, that a Jewish boy was taken to jail who was pointed out by the boy with the Bible, or pointed out the boy with the Bible, and said that he was at the Gestapo headquarters, which means the German headquarters. But the boy denied knowing the Jewish boy and said that he's a Catholic and that he follows the Bible. But even though the German soldier took him out and shot him supposedly, and the other Jewish kids. And the name of the kid with the Bible was actually named Zybek. I don't know how to say that last name.
Yeah, I think it's Polish or Ukrainian. It's Eastern European.
I should be able to say it because I am Polish, but I don't.
I can try. Zbigniew Namoykil.
Yes. He was the president of the bank, but the boy in the Bible was actually not dead. That the Jewish violinist from Holland told him that he was actually in the same bed and died in the same pant Tzaddik was in. And then the guy gives him some coffee and a tomato and says like he really does. He's not going to need it because he's going to die anyways. So he just gave it to Tzaddik. Some themes that are seen is the Jewish boy was taken out in the back in the jail, at least in his story, and just executed. So it shows how like evil and savage the Nazis were, because they're just shooting kids in execution style. The survival of the fittest. The boy denied his own faith because he was Jewish, and called the other boy, the Jewish boy, a liar, and said that he was Catholic just to give the perception so that he would not be sent to a camp or killed. So my question is, would you deny your faith or religion and pretend to follow another if it meant that you would survive?
I feel like it would depend on what circumstances I'm in, because if it meant living in a place like a concentration camp, I don't know if I would want to survive at that point. But if I was just like living the life I live now and they were like, deny your faith and like move to this faith or else I'm gonna kill you, I'd be like, okay. Seems fine.
Anyone else?
Also, like, I just want to kind of throw in there, also don't forget, like, being Jewish is not just a religion, it's also kind of like a ethnicity, it's a community, it's kind of like a pride in your heritage, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, because Jewish people really don't have a state, so they feel like they can make a community anywhere. So that's one of the things that becomes the problem. And like they had to wear the Star of David and everything, the Nazis made them do. So that really like sets them out apart. And that's one of the reasons why the Nazis hated them, because they felt like they were different than everyone else.
Yep.
So let me get to the next short story, and that's a visit. This story gets really at the conditions of the camp, as it talks about how he walked around all night and saw men half naked lying on the ground and on dead bodies. People were so starving that they could not move. And then he saw because he's walking through the camp, and then he looks behind him and he sees his fiancée behind him, who had once been mine. He talked about what he saw the days later, which can be seen on page 175. Let me get that up. So this just shows like how half naked people, they were drenching with sweat, and it talks about like how bad these people were and the conditions were at the camp. Just want to show that one. And then, so a theme that can be seen is the women actually sell their bodies to German soldiers just to get basic things like bread and water, just to survive so they don't starve. Actually, that's survival, sorry. Then the prisoners are not given any food, resulting in them in starving, and they get sick. They get no treatment to help them. Germans actually send the prisoners, like all the people in the concentration camps, if they're like sick and they're not useful anymore, they just get sent to the gas chamber themselves. So that's why it's so important for them to, even though they're not eating, they still have to try to work, even though they don't feel good or they can't do it. So a question is, why does Tariq refer to his fiancée as who had once been mine?
I think it could have to do with like his disconnect from his own life. Like she's still technically his, but he feels like he has no possessions. He feels like he just has nothing.
Yeah, and going off of like what Abby said, I think it has a lot to do with like how consumed that he is like on war. So like he's trying to focus on her, but I think that maybe like he thinks that everything else kind of owns her, like she's not really her own separate person, and that like they can't be together.
Anyone else? So I took it as that he felt like he didn't own himself, and she didn't own herself. It was more the camp owned them, So that's why he refers to him as who had once been mine, as she now belongs to the camp and not him anymore. So that's the way I took it. And now the last one, The World of Stone. This short story, it's not from Auschwitz. It's actually from Actually Returns Home. He is not really returning to his former life because he doesn't really see the point in things. Like, because most people who were like not affected went back to how things were, but he doesn't really see the point of that because he doesn't really see why we should polish shoes or shave or look for a rare book, as he has lost so much time now because he was sent to the camp that feels like he needs to make up that time. And he likes to walk alone in the poor parts of town because of the bad smells, because that's what he's used to from the camp. So it feels like that's where you feel the most safe. And he shows no emotion towards anything, as nothing fazed him after all he saw, like the dead babies, the dead people, the starvation, that nothing really fazed him, and he doesn't feel any emotion. So a theme that is seen, it's kind of seen as survival by now. He's sounding like in this short story that it sounds like he's starving. So I'm trying to start to give up in life because he's barely holding together. This is like kind of before he begins this is like where his path to suicide like starts, because you can see that he doesn't understand the point of life anymore. So he feels like that why are we even living if all this has already happened, and like what happened to him already. So some questions are, why do you think he feels most comfortable when walking in the poor parts of town?
For some reason, it kind of reminds me of like, even though it has nothing to do with this, but like Stockholm syndrome, where like you like grow comfortable with what you're used to, and when even like if someone goes to jail and they come out, it's the adjustment to like the outside world again. Like it doesn't seem real, and you just get so used to what your situation was that you felt like you were yourself in that moment, and you can't find that again.
Yeah, that's how I felt too, because I felt like he just feels comfortable there because he doesn't really like know how to go back to his former life and how to go back into society, that he just wants to say like what he knows. So last question is, one of the major questions that he brings up is he a victim or an executioner? So do you think he's more of a victim or executioner from his time in the camp?
I would still say he was a victim. Like he's a victim even though he feels like he could be an executioner. Just because like what he went through didn't make him he still didn't like truly enjoy what he was doing, and like he didn't want people to die. So he's just confused on who he is, but he's definitely a victim of what happened to him.
Anyone else?
I could just expand on that as like the survivor's guilt he feels and the post-traumatic stress and like all that stuff means that he's like not just a physical victim of the concentration camps, but like you could say he's like been victimized because of his own loss of confidence in himself and his morality and his identity.
I think he's more of a victim because he wouldn't want to go there. And then when he had to take the Jewish people off the transports and put them onto the vans, he wasn't in charge then. He had German soldiers all around them, pointing guns, having whips. So it's not like he really had a choice. But the executioner part is something that really sticks to him, because with this suicide, he actually dies from poison gas, which is the same way that the people he's putting on the the trucks actually died from the same way. So I feel like he's a victim, like you said, mentally and physically. And even though he may feel like an executioner, he's really not, but he actually executes himself the same way that he thought he executed other people. And that's it.
Awesome. Good job.
How do you just take over?
Yeah, I can do that. let's see. I think I have to have you close out first. So if you go to the very top, let's see. Stop participant sharing. Okay. How's that? Good?
I think so, yeah.
All right. Okay. Awesome. So does anyone have any questions about this selection of short stories? Like anything at all? Like questions about like practical questions about like the position of the narrator of these stories and stuff? So Tadeusz Borowski, as Matthew kind of mentioned, was not Jewish. He was Polish, and his fiance was a member of the resistance to the Nazis, although Borowski wasn't. And there was a trap set for her one night, and she got caught by the Nazis. And then Tadeusz Borowski went out looking for her, and her name was Maria. And he got caught in the same trap, and that's how they both ended up at the camps. But because they weren't Jewish, there's actually a really strong hierarchy in the camps. You guys with me, or did I lose my internet? Okay, you're still with me. Okay. So like Poles were kind of up here with Frenchmen who were not Jewish, and then below them were Greeks who were still privileged, but not as privileged as the Poles and the Frenchmen. And then underneath were like Jews, and then underneath them, or kind of on the same level, were gypsies, or who we would like, or who it's more politically correct call Roma, and some of the others. Okay, so according to the Nazis, Jews are kind of less than human, and then Greeks are sort of a little tiny bit more human, and then it goes like this. But at the absolute top are the Nazis themselves. You know, those who are loyal to the Reich. And the reason why Tadeusz got sent to the camps, even though he wasn't part of the German resistance and they weren't setting a trap for him, is because he did have some reading material on him. I think he had, I'm trying to remember now, he had a famous piece of literature on him. Like, it wasn't Shakespeare, but it was something like it. And it was illegal for Poles to go to college or to have any reading material that was not approved by the Reich. And so for that reason, he got sent to the concentration camps. So he's a very privileged prisoner. And if you go to the very beginning, here, let me, I can pull up my version as well. Give me a sec. Do you remember like the very first line of the story? All right, let's see. Where's my?
Is it all of us walked around naked?
Yes. So what does that tell you, that they're all walking around naked?
It's just very dehumanizing.
Yes, exactly. Very good. So they're all walking around naked because, let me share my screen here. Here, I'll share it so you can see kind of where I'm at. All of us walk around naked because they're all infested with lice, right? So the delousing is finally over. Our striped suits are back from the tanks of Cyclone B solution, an efficient killer of lice in clothing and of men in gas chambers. So in this very first paragraph, what is the link being kind of drawn? Like, men are just like?
So they're kind of like relating it to like lice in a way that like they're nothing more than just like I don't know how to describe it. Like, I feel
An
like they're,
infestation, right?
yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And this is exactly what the Nazis did in their propaganda, is that they dehumanized Jews, especially by calling them an infestation, by calling them vermin, by ligating them to mice and rats and invasive kinds of insects, right? And so you can see from the very first bit, like that Borowski has kind of internalized this kind of idea that like because of life in the camp, and I think the kind of relationship to Stockholm syndrome is solid. And I think the relation, like if you wanted to kind of do a psychological analysis of Borowski, you could. There's a lot here, and there's a lot of psychology that kind of shows how difficult it can be. But he's kind of internalized the thinking that he and others are basically just like lice. They're walking around naked because of the heat and because they have no other option. And so Matthew is right that like he is unable to see the humanity of others, but not only that, he's also unable to see his own humanity because he's so far internalized the thinking of the labor camp. So they all walk around naked and the heat is unbearable and the camp has been sealed off. 28,000 women have been stricken. You can see like this, like throughout, right? Like 28,000 women have been stripped naked and driven out of the barracks. Now they swarm around the large yards between the blockhouses. So the women are also like insects. They swarm. And then, you know, there's all these kinds of evidences of dehumanization of himself and of others, or disassociation and stuff like that. Blah, blah, blah. So they call the people who are not Jews who can work and who have some privileges are called the capo. And they're in a really weird position because like the Nazis definitely use them. But if they refuse to do what the Nazis say, they're pretty dispensable. So they'll be killed if they don't do what the Nazis say. A Muslim was they keep calling them Muslims. So like literal Muslims also got like gassed in the chambers, but they keep calling people who have given up and lost the will to live Muslims. Let's see. So at one point it says the Greeks, there's kinds of a reference to the Greeks. Where is it? The cattle cars begin rolling in, I think it's before that. But at one point he says like the Greeks are waiting and their jaws are going as if they're insects. God, where is it? We line up. We march, we cross just a few more runs at Chevelle Station. I can't remember. He says, but Thaddeus is trying to get shoes, right? Don't take any money, just take a shirt and some shoes, because even though it's hot now, if they survive to winter, they're going to need it because there's no extra clothing for them. And Henry knows this because he's been there for a long time. Here it is. Around us sit the Greeks, their jaws working greedily like huge human insects. They munch on stale lumps of bread. They are restless, wondering what will happen next. And then, of course, you know, the line about how they pull out, like they take out the dead, suffocated, trampled infants, and they hold them by the legs as if they're chickens. It's just like horrifying image. How they're forced to, here we climb inside in the corners amid human excrement and abandoned wristwatches lie squashed, trampled infants, naked little monsters with enormous heads and bloated bellies. We carry them out like chickens, holding several in each hand. And like, it's almost like the fact that he has to like participate in the dehumanization in order to get through this is pretty horrifying. And then he even calls them like Henri says, look at the Greeks, they know how to make the best of it, they stuff their bellies with anything they find. And the narrator says, pigs, tomorrow half of them will die of the shits. And Henri says, pigs, come on, you've been hungry. And pigs, I repeat furiously, I close my eyes. So he's like seeing them as pigs. I feel I must vomit. All these people are forced into these situations where they like have to do horrifying things, like the mother who tries to abandon her child, right? Here's a woman, a small child with a pink cherub is an angel. An angel's face runs after her, unable to keep up, stretches little arms and cries, mama, mama. It's not mine, sir, not mine, she shouts hysterically. And then Andre, a sailor, so this is actually another one who's like in Tadeusz Borowski's kind of group, a prisoner who is a commando or I can't remember what the other word is for it, but he's like both guard and victim. He's both prisoner and guard. He like grabs her. He knocks her off her feet. He takes her by the hair and he says, you're running from your own child, I'll show you, you whore. And he chokes her. And the German says, good, good, and good Russian. And Andre says, shut your mouth, through clenched teeth, and walks away after he kills her, right? Here a girl appears. Here is one instance where the narrator is able to kind of recognize the humanity of others. I look at her without saying a word. She's a girl with enchanting blonde hair and beautiful breasts, wearing a little cotton blouse, a girl with a wise, mature look in her eyes. She's gazing straight into my face, waiting. And over there is the gas chamber, communal death, disgusting and ugly. And over in the other direction is the concentration camp, the shaved head, the heavy Soviet trousers and sweltering heat, the sickening stale odor of dirty, damp female bodies, the animal hunger, the inhuman labor, and later the same gas chamber, only an even more hideous, more terrible death. And so it's almost like he's almost jealous of the people that get to be killed right away, right? Why did she bring it? I think to myself, noticing a lovely gold watch on her delicate wrist. They'll take it from her anyway. She says, listen, tell me, where are they taking us? And she says, tell me. But he won't tell her. And don't forget, like he says, like at one point, and here's another instance of like trying to show mercy in inhuman conditions, right? Where is it? And let's see, please, sir, the marks swell to the thousands. Okay, it's on 37. Where are you people from? Sanowski Bedzin, sir, what's going to happen to us? They repeat the question stubbornly, gazing into our tired eyes. I don't know. I don't understand Polish. It's the camp law. People going to their death must be deceived to the very end. This is the only permissible form of charity. And so like this is the only kindness that they can show to people, is to like not tell them that they're going to their death. And even this is kind of fucked up. In later stories that I didn't assign to you, Andre, that Russian soldier, the big sailor who kills the woman, he tries to help some Greeks by teaching them how to march. And then an SS officer sees that and he makes Andre beat them to death. And so any kind of kindness or humanity demonstrated by others, any kind of morality or ethics is severely punished. And if Andre had refused to beat the Greeks to death, then all three of them would have gotten shot in the head. And you get the sense that Tadeusz Borowski, the writer, it's hard to say whether, like, I feel scholars basically agree that these stories are based on him and his own experiences, but he would always get annoyed when people assume that. So I try to call him the narrator in the stories so that, like, just just because he kind of didn't want to kind of own up that it was himself, even though Tadek or Tadek, Tadek is like, it's like Thaddeus short for short. So it really, it does, and like it's definitely him, but like he didn't like people to assume that. Anyway, you get the impression that he really wants to believe that people are good enough to say, I'm going to refuse to do this act of cruelty, and you can kill me, but you can't break me. He really would like to see people as that kind of a hero, that kind of a moral hero. And before Auschwitz, he maybe thought he was that kind of a person, but he's not, and people aren't. And people will do horrible things that they really don't want to do in order to survive just even one more day in horrible conditions. And he really kind of does wish that he had been killed sooner, because then he wouldn't have they wouldn't have broken him in this way. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's when this set of stories, short stories, were first published, people were like, oh, you know, Thaddeus Borowski, he's like so talented, he's such a good writer. Everyone was really excited for this selection of short stories, for him to talk about his experiences in the camp, because they thought it was going to be like all about like tiny small acts of heroism. And then when it came out, people were really offended and disgusted, and it got censored a lot, and people accused him of nihilism, which is like just like hopelessness. So he got a lot of flack and criticism for his experiences, and for not sugarcoating things, and for not kind of telling the truth about what he saw about the horribleness of humanity, and just the kind of absolute, I guess I would say like selfishness of people for wanting to live, for their lack of heroism, right? Okay, so this was one of the first stories, The Supper was, that I ever read. The last thing I kind of want to talk about is like the humor or the irony, or like the humor, like the dark humor tone of this short story collection. Can you think of any like instances like that you see like the dark humor coming through? Like the tone, like what is the tone like? What are you thinking? Like I really see this in The Supper. So Thaddeus Borowski is really, really good at imagery, and he tells everything. He was also a journalist, and so like he kind of, you can definitely see this kind of journalistic or documentarian style in the way he kind of narrates and almost like paints the picture of like the most minuscule details. Like he says, like he starts to describe the Russian soldiers. 20 Russian soldiers in camp stripes, their arms tied with barbed wire behind their backs, were being led out of the washroom and driven down the embankment. The block elders, those similar types of prisoners who are being used by the Nazis to kind of kill others, lined them up along the pavement facing the crowd that had been standing there for many silent hours, motionless, bareheaded, hungry. In the strong glare, the Russians' bodies stood out clearly. Every fold, bulge, or wrinkle in their clothing, the cracked soles in their worn-out boots, the dry lumps of brown clay stuck to the edges of their trousers, the thick seams along their crotches, the white thread showing on the blue stripes of their prison suits, their sagging buttocks, their stiff hands and bloodless fingers twisted in pain with drops of dry blood at the joints, their swollen wrists where the skin had started turning blue from the rusty wire cutting into the flesh, their naked elbows pulled back unnaturally and tied with another piece of wire. All this emerged out of the surrounding blackness as if carved in ice. So it's like super detailed, super, you know, and as Matthew said, like basically hundreds and hundreds of people have been waiting 17 hours for a pint of soup. These men, they are criminals. This is kind of a famous thing the Nazis did, is like they kind of tortured people by kind of making them stand and wait, and they could see soup, but they were not allowed to eat it. So they're like starving them and like waving soup under their noses. And if someone would break through and grab the soup, they would shoot them. They would execute them. And there's in this story, there's a huge kind of contrast drawn between like this kind of horror or barbarism, right? Our hunger was growing more terrible. And what the Nazi officers are doing. So he says like, dusk was falling and our hunger was growing more terrible. But now and then the wind would waft a fragment of conversation, a coachman's call or the occasional rumble of a cow-driven cart. The cows have more humanity than the people. They're dragging their hooves lazily along the gravel. The cows can be lazy, but these prisoners can't. The clatter of wooden sandals on the pavement and the guttural laughter of the peasant girls hurrying to a Saturday night dance in the village were slowly fading in the distance. So this is kind of like both like the horror and the irony, right? He's trying to kind of be like, look, life goes on for all these people. They're going to a dance. So the commandant gave a signal, and out of the darkness emerged a long line of SS men with rifles. They placed themselves neatly behind the Russians, each behind one man. You could no longer tell that they had returned from the labor commandos with us. They had had time to eat, to change, to fresh gala uniforms, and even to have a manicure. Their fingers were clenched tight around the rifle butts, and their fingernails looked neat and pink. Apparently, they were planning to join the local girls at the village dance. So, like, it's almost like the horrible irony here of the fact that this is just business as usual for these guys, like you just casually execute a bunch of prisoners and starve the rest of them so that their only option is to eat the raw brains of these men that you've just executed, and you want to jump back so you don't get splattered with blood, so you can go to the village dance and woo all the local girls, right? And so like Borowski is kind of a master at like the horrible, ironic, so horrible it's almost funny, super darkly ironic, but like sort of humorous, like the surprise, contradiction, right? Tonight the entire camp will go without dinner, shouted the camp elder. The block elders will carry the soup back to the kitchen, and if even one cup is missing, you'll have to answer to me. Understand, boys? A long, deep sigh went through the crowd. Slowly, the rear rows began pushing forward. This is like the unexpected. You'd think that if they say like, nope, no soup, and they take it away, people would turn away and go away, but they press forward. So like, again, this is kind of like, it's not exactly humor, but it's messing with people's expectations and like kind of like ramping up the dark irony, right? Everyone was preparing to jump forward and you're kind of like, but why? There's no food anymore. And then like the last line hits you. A Muslim Jew from Estonia who was helping me haul steel bars tried to convince me that all day that human brains are in fact so tender you can eat them absolutely raw. So there's like a really like the humor, it like, I don't know if you could even call it humor, but like it sort of is, because like it's just so dark. And then a true story has some of the same kind of humor. Like he says, like, look, that story is not your own. Like I've been here a little longer than you. And so there's this weird kind of slash humorous irony that like he's telling the story of the guy who died in his own bunk and he didn't realize it. He died in the very same bed you're lying on. Like, so there's just this kind of horrible irony that happens in the camps. And it's almost like by calling it a true story, he's basically kind of drawing the equivalence between himself and this other guy. Like, didn't happen in my life, but it might as well have. I'm in his same bed. His future could just as easily be mine. Tadeusz Borowski did get pneumonia, just like this guy, the narrator. And because he got pneumonia, he was able to kind of get out of the hard labor, but he became a kind of worker in the hospital. And that's that famous hospital that did experiments on Jews and like did like the Nazi. Have you guys heard of some of the horrors that they did? Anyone?
Yeah, and I also have a question.
Excellent.
Do you think, like, as far as like gender differences back then, like, do you think that it was different? I mean, obviously, like, it was different for like men and women had to go through at the time. But do you think that it was like harsher for like either like gender? Like, do you think that each of them like went through like different things like during the war?
Well, if you were a man, you were much more likely to survive.
Yeah.
Because women, if they had children with them, they were automatically kind of put to death unless the children were like old enough to work. And in that case, they would be separated from their children, usually male children, because the assumption was that women were weaker. And if you're doing hard manual labor, like building crematoriums and ditches and roads and railway tracks, then you want the strongest men possible, especially because you're going to basically starve them and work them to death, and then the stronger ones will last longer. So if you were a man, you were more likely to survive. So I don't know, it's kind of like it's hard to say who had it worse of those who were allowed to live. I don't know, man. Like, I know that the women probably got raped and stuff, but I don't know.
Because that's what I was thinking too.
I don't know that like the men didn't get raped. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, it's dehumanizing. It's so horribly dehumanizing to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you know some of the stuff that they did in the hospital? So they would make like, they would skin Jews and like make things out of their skin. Like there are famous lamps made out of skin. There are dolls made out of skin. They really loved like when they got twins, especially children twins, because they would do different things and see how the twins reacted differently. So like they would inject them with poisons and give them operations, and it's all pretty horrifying. And the Nazis documented everything, and so you can see it. This is like the difference between the Holocaust and other genocides. We tend to like find that the Holocaust kind of looms large in in our understanding because they counted everything and they recorded everything and we have videos of it, and whereas like other kinds of genocidal activities that were also committed in the 20th century, Pol Pot did some in Cambodia, and then there was more in I forgot where it was, but there's more in Eastern Europe right through the 90s. but they didn't keep track of how many they killed or do as many experiments, and they were not as efficient, and they didn't kind of put them in like so. Anyway, so lampshades made from human skin, like you can kind of see like their head ashtrays, like Nazi experiments. So you can kind of see the kind of crazy things that they did. Pseudo experiments, and you can kind of I can send you a video, but like a lot of the stories, there are stories, and there have been books written by women who were one of twins and what was different, and like once they were liberated from the camps, like they don't know what had been done to them. Some of them have been sterilized. There was castration experiments, just like crazy stuff. The other thing I wanted to kind of show you, just to kind of put into context Borowski's kinds of feelings of guilt and his view of the world, is has anyone ever heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment? So you have, Alessandra, want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, Bill Zimbardo. So practically what he was doing was testing how like the, I guess, protection of a role or position would affect human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So he interviewed, what was it, 6 guards and 6 prisoners?
Yeah, or something like that. Volunteers were assigned to be, and so these are Stanford college students, right?
Yeah, they got paid for it, I think, a little bit.
And they flipped a coin to see who would be guards and who would be prisoners, right?
Mm-hmm. And so the prisoners, it was like a hallway of classrooms or something like that, and they would have to be prisoners there essentially, and they got, hosed down and got all matching uniforms and stuff like that. And then the guards were not supposed to like physically hit them or anything. They were just supposed to like keep them in check, but it ended up getting so bad that they called the experiment off in like 3 days, I think, but it was supposed to last 2 weeks.
6 days, it says on here on Wikipedia.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to go off memory. It's been a while since I was in AP Psych.
Yeah, I love it, yeah. Experiment has, so this is part of the reason why we have like rules about how you can conduct experiments. But the idea is like the people who became the guards started to subject the prisoners to psychological torture and stuff like this. Like they are authoritarian, and the prisoners passively accepted psychological abuse and actively harassed other prisoners who tried to stop it. So this happened in America in 1971. And part of what they were trying to understand is like not just the Nazis, but why the Jews didn't kind of rebel against the Nazis, and basically like, anyway, if you're interested, the Stanford Prison Experiment kind of helps us to kind of understand what's happening in This Way to the Gas, and the very fact that Borowski is able to write about it and look at it honestly is kind of a testament to his morality. The fact that he didn't just try to bury it, even though he really feels like he's like not a moral guy anymore, that they broke him. So there's all kinds of themes. I'm sorry, I'm running a little over, but there's all kinds of themes if you wanted to write about this, horror, savagery, psychological torture, identity. You could write about lack of identity or the disruption of identity. You could write about like the humor and the really dark irony of the tone of this thing. Yeah, you could write about like the history and like kind of like link it to the Stanford Prison Experiment if you wanted to. I didn't so much talk about like the last two, but A Visit is actually about when he saw his fiancée Maria in the women's camp, and she had her head shaved, and she was covered in scabs and sores. And I think you guys did an excellent job talking about the visit and how she doesn't belong to him and he doesn't belong to him anymore. And then the last one is the World of Stone, and you're absolutely right that like, and then the World of Stone I think is really interesting because it almost becomes less real once he's outside of the camps. And it's like his life now is totally surreal, and he can't understand it. All right, so he did kill himself at age 28, like several days after his daughter was born, before his wife was home from the hospital. And so his World of Stone, kind of like, it's like the last line of the World of Stone is kind of like a little window into his brain and like how the world is like irredeemable for him. Humanity is not worth living for, so. All right, thanks for talking about Thaddeus Borowski with me. Heavy stuff. It's in like the humor and irony one. I think next week we have, I think it's Dr. Zeus on Tuesday and Dr. Strangelove on Thursday. So Alessandra on Tuesday and Ayana on Thursday, and then 1 week after that only. Thank God, I'm really over this teaching from home. And that's going to be, so I think it's Red Convertible and A Civil Peace, our 2 short stories, and Jay is going to present those. And then When Engaging Targets Remember, and another one whose name I can't remember, Patty is going to present on those. Good? Thanks for stopping in, and I hope you guys are all staying safe. Did I lose you? Yeah. Okay. My internet is obviously horrible, so I'm gonna sign off. Stay safe, you guys. I'll see you next week. Bye.
I just had a question about how was it, the presentation?
It was good.
All right, because I started I know I started a little bit, but that's because I haven't started. So that's why.
Oh yeah, don't worry about that. Plus this is like, this is not normal circumstances. If you could submit your PowerPoint, that'd be awesome.
All right, do you want the PowerPoint, just the one I used, or because I have another one with information? Just the one I used?
It doesn't matter. It's more so like that it reminds me to actually grade it.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye Matt.
I have a question.
Sure, Ariana.
So like the analytical response, it's a soft deadline, right?
Yes.
Okay, and also for like the Macbeth thing, that's Saturday at midnight?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, yeah, if you could.
All right, yeah. I just want to make sure.
Soft deadline. Like I have a lot of grading to do that I just keep forgetting about. So soft deadline.
Okay,
I was thinking
awesome.
like you could probably take to the end of the semester for Macbeth, but maybe not the last week. So either this weekend or next weekend.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Just want to check on
problem. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.